Dr. Mearsheimer, I want to talk a little bit about where we are going from here. You've mentioned that President Trump has two options. Both of them are pretty bad. Whichever one that he chooses, it's fairly obvious that Iran is coming out on top when the conflict ends, and Israel will also stand diminished. Once the war ends, regardless of which option is taken, what will the post-conflict situation look like? Specifically, what happens to the Gulf region? What happens to the larger Middle East and its political dynamics? What happens to Iran's in the region? And finally, what are the chances that middle power Muslim nations like Pakistan and Turkey and Egypt begin to play a more important and a larger role in the affairs of this region?
Well, it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen as a result of this war once it's settled, because there's so many open questions here. For example, as I was saying before, Iran had nuclear weapons. Let's assume that Iran moves down the nuclear road. It moves to acquire a nuclear deterrent. How will that affect Turkey? How will that affect Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and so forth and so on? My guess is that it will lead to larger proliferation. And you have to ask yourself whether you think that is good or bad. Then you have to think about the question of the Gulf states and what they're going to do when this war ends. First of all, they're surely going to end up with terrible relations toward Iran. Iran and the Gulf states are not likely to have friendly relations when this war ends. And at the same time, are the Gulf states going to depend on the United States for their security in the future? I've actually been watching Saudi foreign policy for quite a while now, and the Saudis have been trying to distance themselves from the United States even before February 28th. Now that this war has happened and the United States has dragged the Gulf states into this war, the Gulf states are being pounded by Iran. Relations with Iran have deteriorated. Are they going to want to rely on the United States in the future? Is the United States going to be able to wield the kind of influence in the Middle East in the future that it has wielded in the past? I don't think that's true. And then you throw in on top of that the Chinese and the Russians. As you well know, the Chinese have become increasingly interested in projecting power into the greater Middle East. And I think that means that the Chinese and the Americans and even the Russians will all be involved in this region more than ever. So I find it hard to see a simple answer to what happens after the shooting stops and the war is finally settled. And by the way, the final point I would make to you is what happens to the Strait of Hormuz? Does Iran end up controlling the Strait of Hormuz for the foreseeable future? I think it looks like that is likely. Maybe not, but that is a huge question, and that will have huge consequences, both economically, politically, and militarily. So I would just say that we're sort of moving around in the dark here. It's very hard to see exactly where we're headed. But you can tell all sorts of stories, as I've just tried to do, that tell you that the future could be quite bleak in the greater Middle East.
And you know what is clear, Dr. Mearsheimer, what you've also said previously is that the real winners of this conflict are Russia and China.
Absolutely, the Russians for sure. You want to remember that as a result of the crisis in the world economy, it's very important to get as much oil as possible out into the global market. So we have this amazing situation where the United States is allowing Iran to ship its oil through the Strait of Hormuz out into the global market. We have this amazing situation where the United States has taken economic sanctions off of Iranian oil because we want to see Iranian oil flow into the world market. But of course, this is making Iran richer. To go to the case of Russia, we've taken sanctions off Russian oil as well. So this is a big victory for Russia. Sanctions on Russian oil have been taken off. Why? Because again, we need Russian oil in the world market. Furthermore, the flow of weapons to Ukraine, where Russia is fighting the Ukrainians, is going to slow down greatly. Why? Because the United States needs to send weapons to the Middle East. It needs to send weapons to support Israel, which of course will be done at the expense of Ukraine, which is to Russia's advantage. So you see, from Russia's point of view, this is what I like to call manna from heaven. And then if you go to China, as you know, since about 2017, the United States has adopted a containment policy toward China. We pivoted to Asia, and we were pivoting to Asia, East Asia, in large part to contain China. Well, what's happening today? We're pivoting away from Asia because we're taking critically important military forces that are located in places like South Korea and Japan, and we're moving them to the Middle East. This is not going to help contain China. In fact, it's completely counterproductive. And furthermore, it's going to do harm to our relations with both the South Koreans and the Japanese, who are going to say to themselves, can we really depend on the United States in the face of this China threat, given the fact that they're pivoting away from us at a critical moment? So that's a big victory for China. And my final point would be that, as I said before, China's influence in the greater Middle East is only going to grow with time, because China is going to look like it's a responsible stakeholder in the international system. And the United States has proved over the past few years that it cannot be counted on to behave in a responsible and in a smart way.
So finally, Dr. Mearsheimer, after listening to your analysis, the conclusion that I'm drawing is that the world is going to look very different once that conflict ends, and some of the things that we can fairly confidently say is that we will be seeing a weakened and wounded United States, in many ways a weaker, more damaged Israel, a more powerful Russia and China. The Gulf countries will, of course, it'll take a lot of time for them to get back to where they were before the war. In all of this situation and the kind of landscape that we are looking at, I'd like to bring you back to our part of the region. You've also followed India and Pakistan very closely, and you've also written the tragedy of great power politics and the fact that we are two nuclear nations, and we had a conflict last year in which Pakistan did very well, and we believe, and the world also believes, that we were able to humble India in many ways. And since then, the stock of Pakistan has risen. We are today, Dr. Mearsheimer, in a very unique position where, of course, we have a very strong alliance with China, historical. We have very good ties with Russia, the two victors that you have mentioned, who will end up looking much better after the conflict. We have good relations with Donald Trump, and of course we have a defense pact with Saudi Arabia. And in the diplomatic field, we've far surpassed India, at least in this conflict, where we are playing a central role, and India is nowhere to be seen. So based on all this and the post-conflict situation, do you think that a country like Pakistan, emerging as a strong middle power in the region, in South Asia, West Asia, Middle East, can play a far bigger role than it has been in the previous years?
I think the big issue for Pakistan moving forward is its relationship with India, and the fact that Pakistan is very close to China. And from India's point of view, China is a significant threat. And that means that the United States, over time, once this fiasco in the Middle East is over with, the United States will have a vested interest in moving closer to India. Again, mainly because of the Chinese threat. And at the same time, as you pointed out, and as we all know, Pakistan has very close relations with China. So if you think about the US China competition as the central feature of international politics moving forward, and I think that is correct, by the way, you have this very interesting situation where China is pulled towards, Pakistan is pulled towards China and India is pulled towards the United States. And I think that will have significant consequences for Pakistan and make it difficult moving forward to execute a smart foreign policy.
Dr. John Mearsheimer, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
We'll take a short break, but when we come back, very interesting opportunities opening up for Pakistan. What are they? We'll talk about them after the short break.